afternoon, everyone. I'm sorry that we have truncated your lunch slightly, but we're trying to start close to time. You are very welcome to Plenary 1 of the European Public Health Conference, Transitioning to More Sustainable Food Systems that Support Health and Wellbeing. My name is Suzanne Costello. I'm the CEO of the Institute of Public Health. Based in Dublin and Belfast, we are a north-south agency which focuses on policy development to reduce health inequalities on the island of Ireland. And I am also on the an executive board member of EuroHealthNet, and I'm very pleased to be co-moderating this plenary with my colleague Caroline Costongs, who is director of EuroHealthNet. We are delighted to be joined today by a range of eminent contributors, and we're really looking forward to a very vibrant discussion this afternoon. The debate could not be more important and more complex. Food is central to our health and well-being, but the increase in low-quality diets is a major contributor to the burden of non-communicable disease in Europe. Dietary guidelines simply don't seem to align with how food is produced, consumed, and marketed. Ireland, like many European countries, experiences the complex, often contradictory public policy approaches to food production, consumption, sustainability, and public health. We have had great public health successes in Ireland, legislating to control tobacco use, improve air pollution, reduce alcohol harm. Vaccine hesitancy in the pandemic was low, and trust in public health is high. And as such, public health has a big part to play in facing the challenge of sustainable food systems. We must not underestimate how enormously difficult it can be for individuals, businesses, communities, and policymakers to navigate this landscape, and how critical it is for public health to be at the table to inform and support. But the time for tentative policy approaches is ended. Too little focus on prevention, too much focus on individual responsibility, light touch regulation. These approaches that have been common at European level for many years are simply insufficient to meet the challenge of a complex tangle of environmental, social, and political determinants. Our speakers today can help us untangle these threads together. I know you're all eager to start, so I will hand over to my colleague Caroline, who will introduce our first contributor.
Thanks a lot, Suzanne, and I'm delighted to co-moderate this session together with you. I'm very concerned about the quality, affordability, and sustainability of our food systems. And also, the food environments in which we live is becoming increasingly unhealthy. I see fast food outlets popping up everywhere in our city centers, in our neighborhoods, and particularly in those communities that are much more deprived. And also the availability of ultra-processed food is increasingly available. About 70 to 80% of the food that we buy in our supermarkets is ultra-processed food. And what is ultra-processed food? It's defined as having at least one ingredient that you cannot find in a regular home kitchen. And it is often wrapped in plastic, I must say. And this clearly leads to the rise in obesity, to the rise of NCDs. It is detrimental to our environment and leads us to a climate crisis and also to widening health inequalities. So our food, our health, our Earth is the theme of this conference, and as ever before. And in this plenary session, we will discuss what we can do and what are the most important actions that we need to take urgently, and what is the role of public health and our public health community in this. First, we will start with some introductory remarks from Dr. Tedros, the Director General of the World Health Organization in Geneva. I was very privileged to meet him 2 weeks ago in Astana, and he told me how important food policy is, and it is really a worldwide challenge. So I'm delighted to give now the floor to Dr. Tedros.
Chair Caroline Costongs, Professor Martin Dietrich, dear colleagues and friends, the health of humans and our environment are intimately linked. It's no coincidence that the same diets that harm human health also harm the health of our planet. Over 30% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions are a result of food production and consumption. Reducing them significantly would go a long way towards helping us achieve the Paris Agreement goal of limiting global warming to below 2 degrees Celsius. Food systems are also the largest contributor to depletion of freshwater resources, pollution of ecosystems, and land degradation. They account for 80% of deforestation and are the leading cause of biodiversity loss. And consuming a healthy diet would save 8 million lives every year. Transforming food systems to deliver healthy and sustainable food will make a huge difference to the health of people and planet, particularly for low-income and marginalized communities. As public health professionals, I urge you to be advocates for shifting towards healthier and more diversified plant-based diets and reducing food loss and waste. I also encourage you to engage in this year's COP28, which for the first time will have an entire day dedicated to health on the 3rd of December. Because we need dietary change, not climate change. I thank you.
Thank you very much to Dr. Tedros for that opening address. And this is undoubtedly a global challenge, and WHO are central to that. I'd now like to introduce our keynote speaker for this afternoon, Professor Tim Lang, Emeritus Professor of Food Policy, City University of London. You're very welcome, Tim.
Thanks very much. My thanks to these two, to you, to Dr. Tedros. It's actually a great honor for me to do this, but I want to dive straight in. This is a very complicated issue, the food issue, and it's really wonderful, and thanks to you two and others, that we've got this actually on this so high on the agenda here. I'm going to raise basically 5 points. Very basic issue, what is a good diet? I think it requires a sustainable food system for there to be a good diet. Why isn't that normal? Food politics is part of this, stopping it. It's a dangerous phase that we've entered into in world food politics at the moment. Dr. Tedros was hinting at that. We need a broader framework. We've probably got to think out of the box into different ways and different avenues and different frameworks if we want to change the discourse and get change. And I think there's a lot that public health can do. So I'm going to dive in now. My first slide is that one. There we go. I can't believe anyone here doesn't realize that public health and ecosystems health go side by side. And they go down our mouths every day. That's if we're lucky and get food at all. But, the bottom of my slide, it is also geopolitics. It's also social divisions. It's also the political economy, who's making money out of it, who's got the power. It's resource matters. It's culture. It's consumer transitions going in the wrong direction or not going fast enough. Some argue we need more data. We can always do with more data, but for 50 years we've had data. For 50 years we've had reports from the WHO, from the Lancet, from the environment, from UNEP through to Eat Lancet, on unequal world development from Branca and Brundtland to the Millennium Development Goals and Sustainable Development Goals, from Brandt's North-South Commission to Marmot on social inequalities. We know this. How much data do we really need? The truth is we're still living on an outmoded model. We think food is a rational area. We think because the 1930s predecessors of us argued for more food being the answer, to produce more with lower prices, deliver health, and that would be progress, and it was. But that doesn't explain why we're in the situation we're in now of overproduction and malproduction and ecosystems destruction, largely due to food. We asked farmers to grow more, and they did. And we can't expect any surprise at them being resistant to our new, more complex arguments. There's not a shortage of data, I don't think, but I think our arguments aren't good. We're constantly saying, we appeal to you to do the right thing. But actually we're presented as killjoys, hair-shirters, control freaks, interferers. Another argument is, are we practical enough? There's been a lot of work on practicality, but actually the hard issue, particularly on people on low incomes, is it needs time, energy, experimentation, and will to be able to change your diet. Is it lack of popularity? Well, there's been attempts to get good diets, plant-based diets were part of the hippie culture of the 1970s. But we've been outmaneuvered by advertising and marketing, if we're really honest. Does it take time to change diets? Yes, but the point is there isn't much time if we've got to stop the food system damaging everything that we know it damages. Is it poor science policy interface, as a brilliant paper from Tim Benton in Nature Food argued only last week, 2 weeks ago? I think the answer is yes. We don't have good relations with other arguments. But there is not a shortage of issues. Where are we now? We're in a time of disruption. New realities crowding in. Food is being weaponized. Russia bombing Ukraine. Whatever your views, Gaza being blockaded for food and water is not good public health. The 20th century model is no longer fitting the realities. We threw away ecology as an overarching umbrella. We turned it into ecology, meaning the environment, and social ecology, meaning society. The good news is we've got One Health thinking, Egger and Swinburne type thinking, and my own with Jeff Rayner's contribution of ecological public health. We're not short of ideas, conceptually, but what we haven't done is transform the food system. And yet it's there that the change has happened. There's been a revolution on the farm, revolution in factories in what they produce, the rise of ultra-processed foods, the retail shift from storage, warehouse, to just-in-time systems. This is a new source of risk. There are no stocks. They're on the motorway. And all shaped by massive marketing that no one dreamt was possible. So where does this leave Europe? Well, the good news is the 1930s model that Europe started with at the Strasser in 1958, the Common Agricultural Policy, it has been tamed. But the general picture in Europe is good, a mix of good and bad. The CAP is being reformed. Overproduction has been tamed. The farm-to-fork strategy, I'm sure some of you here know that. It's at last a comprehensive policy position, but it is under attack. The European Commission and public and the Parliament, I think, get these arguments, but they're not winning politically. It's a political issue that's holding us back. The fear of being seen as interventionist, the fear of being seen as nanny states. If we just take meat, the picture is not good. Worldwide, the picture in meat is terrible. It rises and rises. And that's not to demonize meat, it's just to say it's a major source of biodiversity loss and also embedded carbon. Look at the pictures. Not actually very good. Shift away from some red meats to white meats. Okay, at one level that's good, but then you see the white meats are dependent upon destroying the Amazon, soya, etc., etc. Long, complicated picture. We've got a different, more complex set of messages. What can the public health movement do? I think I'm going to say 5 things very quickly. I think we have a real important role, which is to say how important and urgent this crisis is. The weaponizing of food, I hate that word, but it's appropriate. It's a horrible reality. Food being used as a control mechanism, at ghastly levels in war. Public health is all about ensuring people are well fed. Public health makes the linkage between issues left in silos. And this slide is not wonderful calligraphy by me, but you'll see the point. I think we need to take public health thinking back to very basic stuff, linking our analysis of risks to what do we mean by security. A food system which is secure can only be one which is sustainable, and that needs defending. For us, the word protect is very good. For the economists, protect is bad. We have to actually confront that discourse. And we have to build resilience to look after people in and from and in expectation of shock. We've got to realize the externalized costs. This is last week's FAO State of Food and Agriculture report, which has done a brilliant job of itemizing how much the hidden costs of food are. They are an average of $10 trillion a year. In 2020, the estimate is that the biodiversity loss and health externalized costs from poor diet, etc., cost $12.7 trillion. 20% of those costs are estimated to be environmental, but the biggest bits are actually health, in blue here. The third argument, I think, is we must just recognize all the time it's a divided world. Dr. Tedros put that very well. The fourth is that it is not and never will be a matter of individual choice. We have to confront this default position in the modern political economy that food is up to you. This is nonsense. It's framed before you even get anywhere near it. We have to see it as a matter of infrastructure, resources, common goods. It's a multi-criteria challenge. It's not just calories and carbon, a sustainable diet. It's about embedded water, biodiversity, planetary boundaries, affordable by all, costed in a decent and full cost way. This is a multi-criteria approach to public policy. And the fifth argument is we've got to clean up governance. Public health can only work if we are looking after the public. And we're not doing so, frankly. We're not winning those arguments. And I think that's partly because we're not starting from where people are. And they are bothered about security now. We must be addressing that resilience, enabling people to bounce back after shock, whether it's COVID or cost of living or, dare I say it, war or other shocks or disruptions. And in one sentence, and I'm working on a report looking at Britain at the moment on civil food resilience, trying to explore these arguments I'm giving you. We must actually shift the food system from the just-in-time notion of efficiency, where the food is actually in no storage, it's on the motorway permanently. That's where the food is. It's entirely controlled by the logistics industry without thinking about the consequences. We've got to shift that from a just-in-time to a just-in-case, as someone in logistics said to me recently. So I think, to conclude, these are actually, at one level, exciting times. Food has become very, very big politics again. And we in public health must use that well-known public health method. It's called opportunism. Have your moment and have the ideas for what to do about crises and difficulties, and to raise our ambition to that. These are new opportunities for us, even though they look like very bad times. We can search for and provide answers to the politicians, even when they don't know that they will need us. They will. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Professor Langtim, for your excellent keynote and for setting out so clearly the actions that we can do as a public health movement. Indeed, food is political, but with public health, we need to take this leadership role, and we can also, move between the different interests of the different stakeholders and try to achieve change there and a better food system, which is actually going to be the topic of our panelists. And I would like to already invite our two panelists to come up to stage, but I would want to start with our first panelist, and he will join us online. So let's hope that this is going to work. And I would like to see if we can get connected to Dr. Francesco Branca. He is a director of the Department of Nutrition and Food Safety at the WHO in Geneva. And he wasn't able to be with us here in Dublin, but hey, there you are. Hi.
Hello.
Good to see you, Francesco.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you here. And you've been working a long time also on food and transferable food systems. And I'm curious to hear what your suggestions are. How can we make that shift? And what do you recommend? Or what does the WHO recommend for us?
Well, thank you. And first of all, let me thank EuroHealthNet for having put the topic of sustainable healthy diet on the agenda of the 16th European Public Health Conference, and also to have invited WHO to express our views. So So maybe I'll start by saying, what is the challenge we're facing. I think you should have slides. I have two. So the first slide is basically reminding us about the numbers that have been put forward by the State of Food Security and Nutrition. We have estimated that hunger affected last year between 691 and 783 million people in the world in 2022. But if we consider healthy diets, almost 3.2 billion people worldwide cannot afford a healthy diet. Now, conflict, climate variability, and extremes and economic slowdowns and downturns, combining with growing inequalities and the affordability of healthy diets, are responsible for this. When these drivers are concurrent, food and nutrition insecurity grow exponentially. At the same time, and you've heard it from our Director General and from team, food systems are taking planetary resources more than needed. 25% of greenhouse gas emissions, 2/3 of fresh water, 1/3 of land. And it reduces biodiversity and harms the environment with excess nitrogen and phosphorus. And then what is the response to that? And I can have my second slide. Clearly, tackling food insecurity and unsustainable food system mean addressing those drivers with macroeconomic measures. The big politics is important, but it also means a profound food system transformation directed to what is produced and how it's produced. We need coherent and targeted public policies across the whole food system. Upstream supply shaping policies, and State of Food Security and Nutrition call for a repurposing of agricultural subsidies, which is, number one public expense, really. But we know that public investment can drive private investment, but downstream demand shaping policies. And in order for people to change their dietary choices, the food environment needs to change. Highly processed foods, high in fat, sugar, and salt, hyper-palatable, largely accessible, and intensively promoted, have become a large proportion of the diet in high-income countries and are growing in middle-income countries. The trend needs to be arrested. Regulatory policies to curb marketing food to children, tax sugar-sweetened beverages, unhealthy foods, clearly label products high in fat, sugar, and salt, while making available healthy diets to the customers of public canteens can drive the change. Social support systems need to address the affordability of a healthy diet and improve the purchasing power of lower income groups, nudging to make healthy dietary choices. So WHO recommends that children up to 18 years old should be protected from marketing of food that are high in saturated fats, trans fat, free sugars, and salt through comprehensive regulatory policies, including all marketing techniques based on a government-led nutrient profiling model. WHO calls also for the establishment of taxation of sugar-sweetened beverages, as well as taxes of foods that are inconsistent with a healthy diet, and the provision of subsidies for foods that are contributing to a healthy diet. And on labeling, WHO recommends interpretive labeling based on symbols, colors, words, or quantifiable elements that are understandable to all population subgroups. And finally, WHO recommends the establishment of healthy public food procurement and service policies based on healthy diet guidelines, covering the entire process of purchase, subsidy, provision, distribution, service, and sale, including any foods, beverages, ingredients, meals, or snacks purchased with government funds or served or sold in a public health setting. More and more countries are deciding to take these measures, despite the opposition from commercial actors. These actors challenge the evidence base, claim the measures may have a negative impact on employment in the sector, conflict with trade agreement, or are enhancing inequities. However, the data collected in an increasing number of countries show that the effectiveness and the absence of unintended effects. In the context of the Stop Childhood Obesity project funded by the European Union, the WHO has developed a series of policy briefs that describe the arguments and the counter-argument. But we need civil society and academic organizations to play a critical role in supporting the adoption of public health policies to change the food system.
Thank you, Francesca, and a very useful presentation. I think it's really important to emphasize, as you have, the role of public investment as a policy instrument, and also highlighting the protecting of children from marketing and advertising up to 18 years old. I think that's a really, really important measure to highlight. I'd like to move on to our panel now. You'll notice that two additional panelists join us. Firstly, I'd like to introduce Dr. Gunhild Stordalen, who's is going to speak, and also Dr. Anant Jani. So, Gunhild, we'll hand straight over to you, I think. Let me just introduce you properly and remind everybody you're the founder and executive chair of the EAT Foundation, which a number of people will be familiar with. And I think one of the things you're going to talk to us about is how can creative partnerships across policy, science and business contribute to driving the disruption we need to reorient the food system as we've discussed so far.
Thank you so much, and it's fantastic to be here, and thanks to the organizers for putting food systems front and center of this conference. Especially pleased to say that as a medical doctor gone wrong, I do think we need to recognize that, I mean, your brilliant summary, Tim, and also Francesco, of the challenges. The food system has been incredibly successful in doing what it was designed to do, producing vast amounts of cheap calories. And now we have a growing body of evidence, overwhelming evidence, that we need a radical transformation. The EuroHealthNet Commission that came out in 2019, that both Francesco and Tim were commissioners on, was a landmark report and set out for the first time targets for how to feed a growing world population enough healthy food within planetary boundaries. However, one thing I would like to disagree with Tim on, he's an advisory board member of EAT, and I almost always agree with him, but this time I would disagree on that we don't have, well, we have a lot of data, but we still lack consensus on where are we heading to get it right for health, for environment, and for social justice. And if we think about the Paris Climate Agreement and the 1.5-degree limit, well, if you look into the legal aspects of the Paris Climate Agreement, it's very thin. However, that target has been immensely important in rallying the world, not at least private sector and investors, around that target. So I think that the lack of agreements on what are the set of targets equivalent to a 1.5 for food, that is really important to get in place. And that is why we now have EuroHealthNet 2.0 in the making, which is updating and expanding the existing targets, going much more in depth on public health, nutrition, different population groups, going more in depth on planetary boundaries, integrating social justice for the first time, because unless this becomes a just transition and it's an equitable distribution, it won't happen. And that's really, really important to put people, as Tim always says, at the center of the transformation, because we need food systems to work for people everywhere and do that within planetary boundaries. And then on the partnerships, yes, I mean, the only way we can get this right is by finding new ways of working together. And unfortunately, SDG 17, Sustainable Development Goal number 17, is the hardest. We are horrible in working together efficiently. And EAT Foundation, we started 10 years ago, and that was the theory of change we had. We need independent science on the table, and then we need all stakeholders around it, and then we need to co-create solutions and find ways to build that critical mass. I mean, we are up against the world's biggest economy. There's so much vested interests here that are benefiting from status quo, and we need to build that coalition of the determined to move forward. Yes, we need policies, from subsidies to public procurements to dietary guidelines. It all has to work together. It has to be a holistic approach with multiple equally important outcomes, and we also need accountability. There is a great initiative, World Benchmarking Alliance, which is producing publicly available benchmarks ranking the 350 companies, the biggest food and ag companies in the world, on their performance on health, on environment, and on social. And the food industry, the biggest players, they are doing so bad. The vast majority are failing to take this into consideration. Some are now setting targets on climate, some are doing something on health, but it's very, very bad where we are coming from. But we are working with them, and that's one way to put accountability front and center, and then also more transparency. As EAT, we have now doubled down on 2 levers. One is around changing demands and getting that creative collaboration going at the urban subnational level. Governments are slow, they are following in most cases. Cities has been leading on energy, and they have a lot of autonomy. They are small enough to get the shit together. They are big enough to have systems impact. And half of the world's population already lives in cities. And very much of the effort on food systems has happened on the production end, or less on the consumption end, despite Francesco's and World Health Organizations and many others that have done great work. So we are basically now building a coalition of different NGOs as well as C40 to come strongly behind cities and support them in implementing science-based targets, change public procurement, urban policies, building urban-rural corridors with regenerative landscape initiatives in the surrounding area. So it's also a resilience dimension and connecting consumers and farmers. And we really believe that this could be one really important contribution. And the last thing I would say is that we have also a collaboration in terms of shifting food finance. Any investor you meet will know that the future of energy is renewable. Ask that investor what is the future of food. You will get many interesting questions, much less consensus. Investors are not good at understanding systems risks across health, across environments, across social. So we have, together with a range of partners, built something called the Good Food Finance Network, which is all about getting that systems risky investments. They might invest in stranded assets without knowing it, and getting them to invest in systems opportunities, net positive companies and technologies that the world needs. And then the second component is to build, again, a critical mass that can really start tipping the scales. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Gunhild, for your excellent points. And it's very interesting to see how you use science and data to bring different stakeholders together, even though there are many vested interests indeed. And I was also wondering, but we can keep that for the debate, how you use science and bring the public on board as well. And also how you work at the local level and city level, as you can more easily make some impact there, and how you bring investors on board. And then with investors, we talk a bit about business models. And that's a question that I wanted to ask our next panelists, Dr. Anant Jani. Dr. Anant Jani is from the University of Heidelberg, Germany, and also the fellow Oxford University in the United Kingdom. And Anant, you're also leading the FEAST project, which is a Horizon project on sustainable food systems. So in order to make the system change, I mean, how do you work with businesses, and what are these business models, and how can we definitely ensure a more health equality and health equity?
Thanks, Caroline. I had some slides. I don't know if they're up.
Yes, we can put your slide up.
Oh, on that side. Right. So, FEAST. We are a consortium of 35 partners spread across 15 European countries, and that is what we want to be able to definitively, confidently, and comfortably say as a statement within the consortium. And we want you guys to be able to say that as well, and we want your grannies to be able to say that as well, and we want your neighbors to be able to say that as well. Every European should be able to easily eat a healthier and more sustainable diet. Now, that's really difficult in practice. If we go to the next slide. So if we look at some of this is just an anecdotal example. These are headlines. So Tower Hamlets, which is a borough in London, and I'm not picking on Tower Hamlets, these are just headlines. So I live in the UK, and this is a place that I've worked. Almost half of the children are living in poverty. There's also a childhood obesity problem. And there also happens to be, maybe this is related, maybe not, 42 fried chicken shops per secondary school. Now let that sink in. 42 fried chicken shops per secondary school. So what options and what opportunities do these kids have to be healthy? It's either fried chicken or fried chicken, yeah. So in terms of how we can actually shift, some of the stuff that we're working on in Feast, of which EuroHealthNet and EAT are also partners, kind of the fundamental thing is follow the cash. Next slide. So if we go to the left, and there's no, the virtue in the system, and by system I mean the health system more broadly, so that includes all determinants of health, so not just social, but commercial, environmental, digital determinants of health. There's all sorts of perverse incentives around sickness. We know that for the large food multinational companies, for the fast food chains, with high salt, fat, sugar, they have an incentive to sell more. They sell more, they make more, so they have an incentive. It just happens that the side effect of their business models is, one of them is sickness. And of course, another is profit, and you have pension funds, you have large institutional investors, and this goes to GFFNs, that Gunhild was mentioning, are also benefiting from this profit as well. So we're all kind of tied in this system. How many innocent hands there are and bank accounts there are probably very few and far between. And then we have our healthcare systems, which also, the business models, the way they're currently set up, are completely dependent on sickness. When you have a fee-for-service model, the more you do, the more you get paid. And if you do not have sick people in our current healthcare systems, which are based on fee-for-service models, you go out of business. And what does the cash look like? Well, if we go to the top line, the business models that are perversely creating sickness yield about $525 billion in revenue with about an 11% profit margin. And we spend 700 billion euros in Europe every year on NCDs, of which diet is going to be a huge contributor. Poor diet is going to be a huge contributor. So we're staring at about 1.25 trillion euros every year. If you don't follow the cash, and if you think that you're going to be able to touch on the heartstrings of people, it's just really, really impractical, because these business models in 1.25 trillion is tied into everything, including our pensions, in many, many cases. So, and then to Tim's point, the FAO study that was just published last week. So we're staring at about $10 trillion globally in terms of global cost of food systems. And what we would like to do in Feast, we don't want the multinationals to lose. We don't want the food corporations to lose. We don't want the logistics companies to lose. We don't want the healthcare systems to lose. We don't want the physicians to be out of jobs or healthcare professionals to be out of jobs. But what we also do not want is for them to be making profit off the back of sickness. What we would like is to see that 10 trillion actually yielding benefits and delivering health rather than sickness, and shifting our business models so that we are dependent on health, not on sickness.
Great. Thanks, Anant. I guess that is the big question also for our further panel debate. How can we turn around the race to the bottom to the race to the top, to sustainability and to health for everyone? And my first question to you is, we need legislation, we need regulation, governments need to act. And you mentioned, Tim, that the EU Sustainable Food Law is off the table. In fact, Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the Commission, said, oh, we will now move to strategic dialogues. We need to have dialogues. Yeah, what is next? What can we do to accelerate this agenda? And I'm not forgetting Francesco. We also have Francesco here.
Well, me first and Francesco.
Yeah, who else would want to
Well, I don't know about you.
speak?
This is what we've got to discuss. Basically, the sustainable food legislation is on the back foot. It's not gone, it's on the back foot. Next year is the European election. Not for Britain. I'm from Brexit land. That was our mistake. But this is, we have our equivalent. We have an election too, almost certainly next year. Our job is to be very focused on those processes. We've got to not address the politicians, I don't think, but address the people. I think this is a public health issue. We must stop talking to individuals as individuals, but must talk to the people as the people. What is the public interest? What is the population interest? That is the foundation of what public health is. And I don't know anyone, in terms of, say, one of the arguments I threw out, the argument always gets thrown against us. You believe in nannies, you want people to be controlled, you believe in hair shirts, you know, a whole series of slights against us. I do not know anyone who is not in favor of nannies if you call them parents. Suddenly everyone is in favor. We have to shift the discourse in that sort of way to win the public arguments to us. That regulation is good. No one, not even professors of food policy, can actually control any sense of what they know about food. No one is in a good position. It's a collective task we've got to do. It's basic public health principles we've got to do. And just when things are bad, which they are now, is the time to be very clear about what we want and begin those coalitions, what you two do. It's really important here in Ireland and across Europe. Getting those coalitions to have clear arguments with the data, but which appeal not to the politicians, but to the public, because it's the public that pressurizes the politicians.
The public may not like that to hear that they need to eat less meat. You know, we see that already coming up, that people are angry because they want to continue to eat meat.
We're having that dialogue. I mean, I don't let others speak, but I think that it's interesting that on this issue of sustainable diets, we're taking that to it. You can have a nice diet, a good diet, a pleasurable diet. It's very hard if you're on low income to experiment getting off when that cheap chicken shop stuff. I think that was a work of one of my PhD students. But you know, that sort of work is really good because it reminds us there is this avalanche that hits ordinary people and frames their choice. And we say, oh, well, it's your choice what you do. Well, we've got 42 chicken shops offering a complete meal for £1 or €1. Whoa.
It smells good and tastes good.
Tastes good.
Gunhild.
Just following up on Tim's point, I think we need to shift mindsets because people they are allergic to nanny states and governments telling them what to do. But the fact is that it's the food industry that is deciding what people are eating.
That's right.
And that is even worse. I mean, who do you trust the most? The food industry, who's making a lot of money by sickness, or governments to decide what your kids should eat. So I think that's one of the perceptions that need to change. And obviously, I mean, policymakers, more or less, they know what to do, just not how to get re-elected once they have done it. So really bringing people on board, and obviously there will be winners and losers.
Yeah.
And how do we get that right so the losers actually see a future, or the short-term losers see a future for them in that vision? Because it's very hard to disagree that we need to shift to a resilient food system that is equitable, that delivers health for people and protects the planet. I mean, who can disagree with that? So it's more, how do we get there, and how do we bring people around the table? It's really important to get farmers with us. Farmers, they are business people. They will produce whatever there's a demand for, whatever consumers want or what they get subsidies to produce. And obviously, as long as the subsidies go to supporting all the wrong stuff, it's very hard for them to change. And as long as consumers want cheap meats rather than fresh, healthy food, I mean, then you have really an obstacle to overcome. So the dialogues, although it's urgent to get stuff done, but we still need the dialogues because it's so complex. There are so many stakeholders, and we need that shared vision, and then we need to figure out how can we move forward together and compensate the losers and let the winners be pulled.
I have a perverse argument.
We love perverse arguments.
One of my most perverse arguments is that I think we in public health have to argue against subsidies altogether, which is I think the subsidies keep farmers doing what they're already doing on the treadmill. We've got to actually start arguing very different arguments, which is I want double the income to the farmers from the food. I will only give the British figures. In Britain, £250 billion, call it a euro, is spent on food. Farmers get about 9% of that. It's tiny. The value added increases the further away from the land you go. This is something I know Francesco was interested in, to bring him in. I think we've got to be arguing much more radical things. Here we are in Ireland, one of the most effective food lobbies I ever encountered. I was in the former Soviet Union within 2 months of the wall going down, it collapsing. First there was Coca-Cola, second there was World Health Organization Europe, and the third there was the Irish dairy industry.
We're very good lobbyists.
You know, it's a very, very effective and very charming, ruthless machine. So actually it is difficult, Gunhild.
But are you saying that you should stop subsidies or
I think we should be
subsidies?
Well, I think we've used the repurposed subsidies argument, and all it's meant is a cutting of subsidies. And that gets the farmers to be even faster on the treadmill. I mean, we can argue about this.
I'm just conscious.
I think the critical thing is to start thinking, we want people on the land and food producers to produce good food and get a good return for it.
Exactly.
I think that's a better argument than arguing about subsidies.
I think Francesco would like to come in there. Francesco.
He does.
We are in a much different situation than we were 10 years ago. Because 10 years ago, we didn't really have clarity about the effective policies. Now we have all the evidence, we have experience, we have tools on how to implement some of these regulatory policies for the food environment. We are demonstrating they are cost effective. And you know what is most important is that actually there is some countries who are taking seriously this and are basically taking the lead. I must say that the leadership at the moment is not in Europe, although Europe has a very good farm-to-fork strategy, but the leadership is in Latin America, where you have actually, as a result of an alliance of civil society and academia, but by civil society, I mean both the NGOs and the parliamentarians were very, very important. And you have basically countries like Chile and Mexico who have established some of these important policies with a lot of oppositions, but they have established these policies with effects on basically the dietary shift. So what we need is to get more of that and to get more of that in Europe. On people's consensus, actually people's consensus is not the most difficult thing to get, even on meat consumption. In New York, and this is the United States, where actually the average consumption of meat is 700 grams per week, which is way above what is acceptable. I mean, Eat Lancet says 49 grams a week, so it's 7, 8, 10 times more than that. But in New York hospitals, they managed to reduce the consumption of meat by very clever ways. They've reduced the greenhouse gas emissions by 36%. So I don't think that actually the people's opposition is the biggest problem. As already, I think Tim and Gunhild were hinting, it's actually the food environment, what is upstream, the consumer's choice that we need to intervene on.
Can I, sorry, you will come in a second. I think the lack of the consumer. Sorry, I will come back. I lost my point. Yeah.
Okay, I'll just very briefly go. Touching on this notion of business models in terms of regulation, I mean, I think it's fairly common knowledge that the Farm to Fork initiative, as well as UK's food strategy, basically tabled because of hard lobbying from the food industry, because of their perverse incentives based on their current business models. Again, like what we're trying to do in Feast is to make statements for the future. So in the future, can we have the large multinationals lobbying for stuff that actually delivers health? So can we shift our business models so they're not losing profit, they're not losing cash, they can keep their cash, but when they get their cash, we also get health in our population. And I think in terms of regulation, these are the most powerful entities that control so much money. They will have the closed-door, backdoor meetings that we will never have access to, unfortunately. And unless we get them on board, I don't see how this is going to work. Just producing more epidemiological evidence. What happened for the arguments around meat? They came in and said from kind of thin air that the evidence is flimsy. And they can always say that, right? Like you could always say that. We can come up with the most bulletproof stuff that no MP is going to understand, because it's like 70 pages with all sorts of econometric models that they've never even seen, and formulas and squiggly lines that they've never seen. And then you have somebody else sitting with them, hey, John, why don't you come with me to the pub? Let's have a little chat about that paper. And then 1 hour later, you've lost all your support for that.
Definitely much more fun. I'm very conscious of time. So what I would like to ask you is just one question, and then maybe ask you to conclude at the end of the question. The issue of individual behaviour, a lot of the time, as you know, we all engage with policymakers, and they have a difficult job to do. But you go in and we're talking about the policy instruments, public investment, regulation, legislation, but we nearly always come back to campaigns about individual behaviour. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, I understand they're done in good faith, but it sometimes seems to put a huge amount of responsibility on the individual yet again, and that sort of burdens individuals who are in environments, as you pointed out, with chicken shops, where it's virtually impossible. I mean, you'd have to have Olympian levels of self-discipline to have a healthy diet in that environment. Any thoughts? Is there any value in those campaigns at all?
Not much, but I think it makes us feel better, so there's some value. I'm with Francesco on this, absolutely. But I think it's a question of what sort of regulation. The sort of regulation I'm now interested in is planning regulation. Back to Anant's lovely example. Planning can do what public health can only do rhetorically. If we control how many food outlets there are around a school, why not? That's when parents are your supporters. It's not nanny state, it's parents. They can help there. So I think it's thinking through how to go upstream. You can't see, Francesco, I'm looking at you. I think you're absolutely right. He's smiling. We know each other. How do we go upstream? It means public health going back to basic 19th century principles of protect and prevent.
So
protect
the environment
is
and
it's not just the local environment, but it's the macro environment.
Okay, so
I will come in, but Francesco was raising his hand.
Very, very brief, because we only have 2 minutes left, to be honest. So actually, I would like to give all of you one opportunity to say your key message. I mean, we'll have European elections next year, indeed. And we'll have a session later during this conference about the EU priorities for the elections. So what would be your priority action? What is really your message that you want to give to us and to policymakers at European level?
Well, I'm a European, but I'm not allowed to vote in Europe because of historical choices. But I'll give my equivalent, which is that Britain has no food policy. I mean, we're in Europe, and I helped a certain amount on the farm to fork strategy in that whole area. So I have big, long-term personal commitment to that. We have exactly that problem accentuated in Britain. Britain's left Europe, but gets most of its food from the European Union. You couldn't invent the stupidity here. But we are where we are. But it doesn't have a food strategy. So if in doubt, have a food strategy. Secondly, I think at the local level, I think we've been better at the national level on food policy thinking than we have at the local. I think we need to be, I'm calling in my report I'm working on at the moment, for local food resilience committees to fit in with resilience planning. I think planning is a critical word for us to celebrate. It's a bit like protect. Take it away from the economist.
Nice.
Planning and protecting is good.
Nice. Gunhild.
I couldn't agree more. We need holistic food and agricultural policies across, cross-ministerial, whole of governments, strategies to be put in place for everything from subsidies to public procurements, fiscal policies, etc., are working towards the objectives we need to see. And if there was one policy that would really change the game or change the rules of the game, it would be introducing true cost accounting for the food industry. And that will be very hard. Will be very hard because, again, there will be losers. And the only way we can fix food, and it's a non-negotiable, something that matters to all of us, not at least people like you in the public health space. We really need to mobilize and build those new coalitions. So I would invite you to be even more engaged in the food systems discussions, and as public health professionals or as health professionals, you have a really, really important voice and a role to play. So that collaboration and holding hands, leadership, and also calling out the cost. What you said was beautifully put.
Anant.
People who have power and money, A, don't want to lose it, and B, want more. So, make sure, exactly. So, their greed should lead to health rather than to sickness. And so, what I said before, follow the cash.
Thanks. Francesco.
Yeah, you put together a panel with people who think alike, so I'm going to reinforce some of the messages, but basically 3 points. Number one, change the food environment with public policies. Public policies have a big responsibility. Some of them are difficult to be accepted because of the actors. Marketing, I think marketing is a big challenge, but some others are not. Some others will find greater support, such as the public food procurement policies. Healthy public food procurements are going to be a major driver of change. Second, adjust the investment to the policies, whether it's upstream or downstream, the money, and I agree with Anant, we have to follow the money, but the money has to be oriented in the right direction, otherwise we're going in the wrong direction. And third, the campaigns, bring people on board, but not to persuade them, not to tell them what to eat, but to tell them to support the policy change. And if you see what has happened in Latin America, it was an incredible popular support on taxation policies, on marketing restrictions. We need to have the same in Europe. Unfortunately, there's a lot of misinformation, and those who don't want these policies are basically persuading the public they're negative policies. We can change that. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much, Francesco, and thank you to all our panellists. I think what you've done today, which has been remarkable, is you've given us very clear actions that we can take and as public health professionals take away from here today and begin to implement them in our own countries and our own communities. So thank you very much indeed to Tim, Gunhild, Anant, and to Francesco online.
Thank you.
And I would just like to conclude that we wrote an article about this topic in the EuroHealth journal, and I would like to invite you to read it as well. Thanks a lot to you as well.